What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. We are coming off an incredibly exciting and exhilarating Packers Saints joint practice. It was so fun to see another team at camp. I think we've seen this Packers defense dominate against their own offense, but the big question was going to be, could they continue it up, or could they continue being like super aggressive and super amazing against a new opponent, against a good offensive line, guys like Ryan Ramczyk, etc. We will get to that in a moment. It is exciting to talk about. But before we get there, we had a couple notes, transactions, logistics, like we always go through right at the beginning. So let's get through those first. The Packers did make a handful of transactions. They did release Dominique Dafney, BJ Baylor, George Moore, and Ellis Brooks. As they finally officially claimed Nate Becker, the tight end, as well. He was not at practice. I think it was just more of a logistical thing of getting him in town and everything like that. But the big news here, they released 4 players, right? Dafney, Baylor, Moore, and Brooks. It took me all of less than 24 hours, but like maybe 8 hours for my 53-man roster prediction to go right out the window as Dominique Dafney was released. I had him on my 53. That one definitely caught me off guard and was surprising. Now, tough to know how much of this was injury related and how much of this was giving him an opportunity to maybe find a different team. I think the big question I would have had here, I was talking to Marcus Eversole on the sideline of like, if they got word that basically Rich Bisaccia didn't have Dominique Dafney in their special teams plans, then this move becomes rather obvious, right? Because Dafney's an interesting player. More of that H-back, fullback player, not a true tight end, can do a little bit of tight end stuff, but not that traditional tight end. If he wasn't going to be involved in special teams, then this makes a ton of sense. It was just tough to know with him being injured as of late, but definitely still caught me by surprise. I thought Dafney would make the roster and certainly would make it to at least the final roster cutdowns. If he didn't make the roster, I thought he'd have an opportunity to make the practice squad. So surprising that Green Bay let him go here. Same thing with BJ Baylor. I guess my question would be is I'm not sure what more BJ Baylor could have done up until this point to stay on the roster. You know, he had the great catch in preseason, the 70 some, I don't know how many yards it was, but the great catch from Danny Etling that he, almost brings the distance to the field. If Danny Davis probably would have blocked the right guy, the corner, instead of trying to get to the linebacker and almost cut BJ Baylor off in the process. Baylor probably goes for a touchdown. He's pass protected very, very well. So I don't know what went into that decision, but that one was a little bit surprising as well. George Moore, not surprising. I didn't see any sort of upside there. Hope he catches on with another team and hopefully, he finds success. But I think he still has a ways to go in his overall development before he's ready to be even a practice squad guy, quite frankly. Ellis Brooks was a little bit interesting, as I mentioned yesterday. He was a guy that I had on my list as a potential release here. I still thought maybe they would have went with like a Ty Summers just because it doesn't seem they have any plans for him, and maybe keep an undrafted guy like Brooks around who could maybe compete for a practice squad spot. But Brooks hasn't done anything in camp either, so not super shocking in any capacity there. Dafney, to me, was definitely the big surprise. BJ Baylor, slightly surprising, but that makes some of those other roster moves interesting as we go along, right? I think this has to be great news for Tyler Davis. You would think that they're going to want at least 4 tight ends on the roster with Robert Tonyan coming back from injury. Mercedes Lewis is going to be a limited guy with basically just playing blocking downs. And then it's just Deguara, who's not a true tight end, who's a little bit more of that tight end H-back as well. And then you would have another true tight end in Tyler Davis. You would think, and long ways to go here, but you would think that would very much clear away for Tyler Davis. I think the other thing that's so surprising about this Dafney move is that if all of a sudden they would have another injury, whether it be to Tyler Davis or Mercedes Lewis or Josiah Deguara, you would think that Dafney, keeping him around as a just in case sort of guy, would make a ton of sense here. But I don't know, maybe they really like one of the other guys, whether it's Alize Mack or Sal Cannella. We'll have to sort of monitor that as well. They just bring in Nate Becker. So we'll see what happens at that tight end position. But it would seem the odds-on favorites right now are Tonyan, Lewis, Deguara, and Tyler Davis to make the initial 53, although I was just wrong less than 24 hours ago with predicting Dominique Dafney was going to be on there. So we will have to wait and see there. All right. As I mentioned, Nate Becker was not yet at practice. The full did not practice list was Dallin Levitt, Nate Becker, Tariq Carpenter, Darnell Savage, Innis Gaines, Akil Byers, Mason Crosby, David Bakhtiari, and Kylan Hill. There were no new injuries at the beginning of the day. There were no players returning from injury. So it was the same group with Nate Becker not being there, again, due to logistics. In addition, as we're going through some of the team talk here from practice, just reminder and remember that Elton Jenkins, Christian Watson, and Robert Tonyan did not participate in the team drills. They were all working individuals, so they made it in back-to-back practices and individual work, but none of them are doing any of the team drills quite yet. Speaking of injuries, we did have a couple injury issues that happened at practice for the Packers. The first one was Danny Davis. He went into the locker room. Sounds like he was helped by a trainer. As far as I could tell, and as far as I have heard, he never reemerged from the locker room as the period ended at the very end of practice with the young player period. Usually that's where Danny Davis is going to be and working with that group. He was not out there working, so hopefully it wasn't anything serious, but it does seem like Danny Davis suffered some sort of injury. And the other scare was Rashaan Gary, who walked into the Don Hutson Center on his own, came back out with the team doctor, although then put his helmet on, went back to his team with this on the sidelines, looked like he was ready to go back in, but never went back in at practice as the number one defense took the field in the 2-minute drill. Rashaan Gary was not out there. Per Matt Schneiderman, who was in the locker room after practice, it sounds like there's no major concern with Gary and that he's totally fine. He looked totally fine. There was no noticeable issue. He jogged off the field at the end of practice. He was goofing around. He was dancing with TJ Slayton. He seemed in great spirits. There was no trainers around him. There was no nothing. So I think it's much ado about nothing with Rashaan Gary, but anytime you have a player the caliber of Rashaan Gary that goes out and misses the rest of practice, there's always those warning bells that are going to go off, but it sounds like he's going to be just fine, and there's nothing major to report for an injury situation here with Rashaan Gary. Now, before I get into my observations from practice, I know I went at the very beginning when we started doing these practice breakdowns of what it's like for the media gauging practice, but I feel like I need to sort of recalibrate here because these joint practices are a lot different. So first of all, because they are so packed, even from a media standpoint, a friends and family standpoint, a VIP standpoint, even the side where the media is on was insanely crowded and was separated into 3 different sections. So you had friends and family of the players on the far right side, family or the players and coaches. You had the media in the middle, and then you had VIPs and special guests on the left side. So the media was set in the middle where we only could go in certain spots. In addition, you had 2 practices that are basically going on at once. So you had Rodgers in the offense versus Demario Davis in the Saints defense. And then over here, you had Andy Dalton in the Saints offense versus Rashaan Gary in the Packers defense on this side. And again, the media's in the middle. You could sort of get to the extremes to see like sort of one or the other. So you had to basically choose, all right, do I want to sort of try to stand in the center and see a little bit of each, or do I want to go down to one side? Your best bet was to try to go in one side and just view one at a time. So I started by watching the offense and sort of keeping an eye or like and just peeking on the defense every once in a while. Then I went down to the defense with sort of keeping an eye and peeking at the offense once in a while. And then the final period was just one offense in the 2-minute drill, then defense in the 2-minute drill, which was obviously a bit easier. The other logistical issue here is that the entire Saints group was like standing right in front of us as well. So you've got a bunch of like 6-7 offensive linemen and stuff and everyone else that's obstructing your view of actually what's going on. So there's plenty of observations. I just want you to be aware of like there is a crap ton that's going on because there's 2 practices happening basically simultaneously. You've got the small section that you can navigate and there's a bunch of players in your view. So there were a lot of us that were just sort of like comparing notes of like, what did you see? What did you see? So we could put together the whole picture and get you all the observations that we could possibly get you. So just wanted to sort of recalibrate that because it was a little bit different for these joint practices. So what stood out? We talked about it at the onset, right? The Packers defense has been phenomenal in practice so far. With a Saints offense coming to town, would that change? The answer was unequivocally no. In fact, it did change. I'm going to take it back. It did change. It was even better. This Packers defensive front was insane. It was absolutely insane. I wish everyone could have seen it because Andy Dalton goes back to pass. There's like everyone swarming Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton goes back swarming Andy Dalton. They hand it off, stuffed at the line of scrimmage. The defensive front, these are some of the players that notably had sacks and pressures. Rashaan Gary, Jerron Reed, Dean Lowry, Kenny Clark, Kingsley Igbari, Quay Walker, Tipa Nelliai, Devontae Wyatt, Preston Smith, TJ Slayton, with many of them having multiple sacks. It got to the point where you couldn't even track it anymore defensively because there were so many pressures, so many sacks, so many blown whistles because the defense just engulfed Andy Dalton or Ian Book or who was ever at quarterback at the time. They were doing it against the ones. They were doing it against the twos. They were doing it constantly to the point where like it was almost a struggle to be like, all right, who got the sack on that play? Because there was 2 or 3 Packers that were surrounding the quarterback. Who do you want to give it to on that play? Preston and Gary combined for a sack. Devontae Wyatt and Tipa combined for a would-be sack. And it wasn't just against the backups either. As an example, Quay Walker had one of the plays of the day. He comes off the edge against Ryan freaking Ramczyk, one of the best offensive tackles in all of football, gets a holding penalty on Ramczyk, still gets to the quarterback. He's not even one of their edge rushers. He's an inside linebacker who was playing out on the edge. That was the type of day that it was for this Packers defense. They were batting down balls at the line of scrimmage. I mean, the Saints had a couple nice runs. They had an Alvin Kamara option route against Quay Walker. Quay Walker had the really great play against Ramczyk. He got set up one-on-one against Kamara, which I don't care what linebacker you are. I don't care if you're Ray Lewis in your prime, Brian Urlacher in your prime. I don't care who you are. Alvin Kamara on an option route is not an easy task. Kamara got the best of that one, caught a touchdown in the end zone. There were a couple completions over the middle of the field, but the Saints offense could barely do anything, and I cannot stress to you enough how impressive that it was. I was talking again to Marcus Eversole along the sidelines of 107.5 The Fan here in Green Bay, and for the first time I think ever, we could have went down and watched the offense. We had no interest. What was going on with what the defense was doing and how many pressures they were getting and how many sacks they were getting was so entertaining because it was just play after play after play to the point where if Green Bay's defense didn't get basically not even just a pressure, a sack, like a legitimate sack where they surrounded Dalton on the play, it was almost an upset. That's how frequent it was. You guys know me well enough. I am not the hyperbole king of the world. I will tell you exactly how it is. It was so impressive. And how that translates to Sundays and Mondays and Thursdays, etc., will remain to be seen. That first Vikings game could be a 45-44 shootout, and you just don't know. This is the NFL. Anything can happen. But the defenses overall, the Saints defense was ahead of the Packers offense as well. I think the Packers offense had a little bit more success. We'll get to some of the big plays in just a moment here. But overall, defenses both won the day. Rodgers called the Saints defense versus the Packers offense a stalemate. I think that's probably fair, but there was no question about it. Packers defense dominated the Saints offense. It was just Andy Dalton, no Jameis Winston. He did not practice as he's recovering from injury, but it didn't matter. Andy Dalton had nothing to do with how the defense was just whooping the offensive line of the Saints, and they were whooping them over and over and over again. By the way, coverage on the back end was super fantastic as well. So all really, really good stuff. On the other side, as I mentioned, the offense at times, the Packers offense struggled as well. I think the frustrating thing here is there were a lot of self-inflicted wounds. There was a ton of penalties on the day. There were 2 referee crews, and it felt like they've been waiting to throw up flags for some time because they threw flags on everything. There was one Juwan Winfrey holding where Bill Huber and I were both just it didn't look like anything. So I think the refs were a little bit trigger happy and excited to throw some flags again, but the Packers had 3 false start penalties on offense, had a false start penalty on special teams. They had a holding penalty on offense. They had an offensive pass interference. That was just in the first period on offense. They had penalty after penalty and kept shooting themselves in the foot. They had some key drops, one of which I'll discuss in just a second. It was just a very unclean operation from the Packers offense. And listen, we can all talk about Elton Jenkins and David Bakhtiari and Christian Watson and Bobby Tunyon. They're all going to come back and help. And yes, that's great. But the guys that are out there, it's one thing if some of their, if Tyler Davis just isn't as good as Robert Tunyon, that's understandable. If Yosh Nijman is just not as good as David Bakhtiari, that's understandable, so on and so forth. But those guys still can't, and I'm not saying they did. I'm not saying it was Davis or Nijman. In fact, it wasn't. But you still can't have those guys making penalties. Like, everyone out there still needs to be on the top of their game and not making mental mistakes, because you already know it's going to be harder without some of your stars out there. So that, I think, was a little bit frustrating from the Packers offense, and the fact that so many self-inflicted wounds with penalties and with drops. And we've heard Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers talk about young receivers not running the right routes. These are all things that very much need to get cleared up prior to Minnesota, or it will be an issue offensively against the Vikings in a dome, in a loud environment, in their home opener. That is going to be a tough game offensively. They have got to get some of that communication stuff and the penalties and all of it cleaned up, because otherwise, like I said, going to be a very tough day in Minnesota week 1. All right, now for some good news on the offense. Sammy Watkins had hit by far and away his best day of practice. He had a couple big catches over the middle of the field, but more importantly, Rodgers gets a free play off of the Saints defense. Sammy Watkins separates down the field, and Rodgers hits him completely in stride. I think the safety probably would have had the angle to stop it before a touchdown, but maybe Watkins could have cut into, who knows. But either way, it would have been a super explosive play off of a free play. Gorgeous ball by Rodgers. Beautiful route and catch by Sammy Watkins. Like I said, he had a couple other really nice catches as well. And then Alan Lazard, one of the absolute plays of the day. He's guarded by Chauncey Gardner-Johnson down the sidelines. Rodgers throws up more of like a 50-50 ball, and it looked like Chauncey Gardner-Johnson had better position. Alan Lazard skied for this thing, went up over the top of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, physically got the ball at the point of attack, brought it down, both feet down. It was an absolute mossing of a cornerback. And I know that term gets thrown around from time to time. This was a big time play from Alan Lazard. So things you love to see there. Defensively, another big play. Sean Davis had a pick six. This was Ian Book and not Andy Dalton. So Book was looking right. Sean Davis jumped the route, took it, would have housed it for six. So he continues to show up. He's had, 3 picks in the last week or so, and now a pick six against the Saints in their number 2 offense. So he continues to show up and be really good at camp so far this year. Another player that I want to spend a hot second talking about here. I don't know that I've talked about him much at all. Kobe Jones, outside linebacker. He has had a very, very nice camp. I counted 3 sacks and a stop at the line of scrimmage for Kobe Jones against the Saints on Tuesday. And how you know that this is starting to matter and catch the coach's eye, at the end of practice, 2-minute drill, all of the ones on defense. Remember, Rashaan Gary's not going in this period because he's probably had a little bit of a issue, a little bit banged up, and they probably just don't want to risk anything, right? So Rashaan Gary's out. Who takes the spot opposite Preston Smith? It's not an Igbari. It's not Tipa. It's not Garvin. It is Kobe Jones. It is the entire number 1 defense and Kobe Jones out on the edge. He had an unbelievable day up until that point. He earned that spot. I would love to ask Matt LaFleur if that was the reason they gave him that spot, but I don't even really need to ask. I guarantee you it was. His performance on the day and what he's been doing as of late has been super impressive. He continues to find ways to win. I don't know that he has, I don't know if a 53-man roster spot is in his, even in the realm of possibility for him. But man, talk about a guy that was a throwaway player at the bottom of the roster who has really made a name for himself and gets the number 1 reps opposite Preston Smith when Rashaan Gary goes down at the end of practice with a little bit of an injury. Huge day for Kobe Jones and a player who is quietly having a fantastic training camp. Another guy who is coming on huge as of late, Kingsley Igbari. He had back-to-back plays with pressure/sacks, and he had one of the most picturesque closing the back door plays on a run play that you could possibly have. So closing the back door, it's imagine you're left outside linebacker. So if you're the offense, he's to your right side, and you're running a stretch play to the left. So what Igbari's job is to do is to maintain on the backside to make sure if the quarterback bootlegs or tries to, get to the outside, that you stay home and stay on the quarterback. He did that perfect. He stayed home, made sure that the quarterback didn't have the ball or bootleg or do anything crazy on his end. But he did it while staying in perfect phase, moving down the line of scrimmage. And then he stayed tight to the line, goes completely down the line of scrimmage, and then makes the tackle on the running back for a loss. Now, and why it's called closing the back door is what the running back would like to do. If that edge player gets too far out and honors the bootleg too much, what happens, that defensive front gets all going one way and the offense cuts back into the back door and has a huge alley up the field, right? You see outside linebackers play that poorly all the time. And if they mess it up, there's a huge gap there for the running back to cut into. And that's where you see that zone stretch play cut back and you go to daylight, right? In this play, Igbari makes sure there's no bootleg, scrapes down the line of scrimmage, and then makes the tackle for the loss, leaving no opportunity for any sort of cutback lane. That is a big time play and a huge attention to detail play for a rookie. Also, like I said, a couple pressures on the day. Like, he has really come into his own over this past week, and it has been really fun to watch. All right, other notes, the starting offense when they put their initial offense out on the field: Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones, Mercedes Lewis, Randall Cobb, Sammy Watkins, Alan Lazard, Yosh Nijman, John Runyon Jr., Josh Myers, Jake Hansen, and Royce Newman. So those are your Packers starters on offense. Romeo Doubs continued his up and down training camp, and there's been some downs too. And I think, all of the flash plays have been super exciting. He had another one. He had a toe tap, beautiful catch from Aaron Rodgers in the end zone for a touchdown against the Saints' number one defense. He continues to come up with big plays every day, but also had a absolute gorgeous 9 route down the sidelines where he wins on his route. He has a step on the defensive back. Aaron Rodgers called it his best ball of the day. He dropped it perfectly into the waiting arms of Romeo Doubs, who dropped the pass. Drops have been an issue for Doubs in games and in practices. The preseason game, obviously, it reared its ugly head. It has been an issue. Blocking has been an issue. Route running and doing the exact right thing that he's supposed to, per Aaron Rodgers, these young wide receivers have all had issues with it, has been an issue. So it's great that he's making these flash plays, but consistency on routes, consistency in blocking, and consistency with his hands are still going to be huge things that he needs to continue to improve upon if he can, see his potential through and actually become the playmaker that I think everyone thinks he has the potential and ability to be. So huge play on a touchdown, huge negative on a dropped would-be probably touchdown on a gorgeous ball from Aaron Rodgers. Eric Stokes and Rasul Douglas were the two jammers on the punt team. Make of that what you will, or make note of it. Offensive line struggled a little bit at the beginning, but I thought they really settled down as the practice went on. Whereas on one side, the Packers defense was getting a pressure on almost every single play. On the other side, I thought the Packers offensive line really got, settled into the game. A.J. Dillane had a big run towards the end of practice that the offensive line did a good job opening up. And I thought overall the pass protection was pretty darn good for Aaron Rodgers. So even Sands, Elton Jenkins, and David Bakhtiari, I thought that was a pretty darn good sign for the offensive line against a defensive front that's pretty darn good for the Saints. Cameron Jordan did have a couple explosive plays in the backfield, but he's bound to do that every now and again. But very pleased with how the offensive line settled down as the practice went on. 2-minute drills. The number one team offense got down the field, had a couple big plays. I think that might have been the big Lazard play, but I could be misremembering on that. But either way, they got down into field goal range and kicked a field goal. The number one defense shut down the Saints offense. They did not get a first down. It was highlighted by a pass breakup by Jair Alexander on Michael Thomas on the last play that sealed the Packers' victory for the number one defense. Number two offense didn't do anything, get a first down, and the Saints' number two offense didn't do anything either. So those are the 2-minute drills. Post-practice, Rodgers did comment on the young receivers and basically said these guys need to have more consistency. The drops and the route running and the miscues have been a major issue, basically called them out for it. And as I've said all along, I can guarantee you this is a quarterback that is extremely attention to detail. I promise you he is going to want Sammy Watkins, Alan Lazard, and Randall Cobb out there as his primary receivers, along with Jones and Dillane in the backfield, along with Tonyan and Lewis at tight end. He is going to want those veterans out there. When asked the question of his pecking order at wide receiver and where he would put it right now, the three that he said, Watkins, Lazard, and Cobb. So there's a lot of potential in Dobbs. There's a lot of potential in Watson. Those guys will continue to make progress. Same with Amari Rodgers, but there's no question in my mind Rodgers is going to want those veterans out there more often than not. If you're drafting in fantasy, I'm sure Romeo Doubs is a sexy name to draft right now. I promise you he's going to be looking to those veteran receivers early and often to start the season until those rookies really start to prove themselves maybe a little bit more as the season goes along. Players of the day, the Packers defensive front. I don't even care. You can do Kobe Jones. You could do Kingsley Igbari. Rashaan Gary was a beast again. Jerron Reed, and just all of them combined went full beast mode. The Saints couldn't block them, and it was really, really fun to watch. That is going to do it for me today. I always appreciate you listening. Make sure to hit subscribe if you haven't already. I will be right back here tomorrow breaking down day 2 of Packers joint practices with the Saints. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.